Hey guys, welcome to a Red Line Talk Show. I'm here today with Iriana, and our special guest is Nick Gjelaj, who is a distinguished attorney, a trial lawyer specializing in construction accidents.
Hello, good afternoon.
Welcome,
Thank you for
welcome
having
to
me.
the show.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you.
Pleasure meeting you both.
So you've been recognized as a super lawyer by New York Magazine since 2013, and also one of the top 100 trial lawyers in the country. You've been also featured in a lot of different magazines, you're also working in politics as well. Before we go into all of that history of your career, I want to go back to the roots of you coming here as a first-generation Albanian American and a union household. How did your childhood and your upbringings influence you to who you are today?
Oh, and it influenced everything that I've become. My family came here in 1970. They came from Gusin.
Kava Gutsin?
Yes, and they were in a refugee camp in Italy for, I think, 10 to 11 months in a place called Genazzano, right outside of Rome. They were there waiting for their political asylum papers. They came to America in 1972. I was born. So
we know your age.
Yes, it's okay. I won't hide it. 52, going to be 53. I have a couple of cousins of mine that grew up as brothers. We're about the same age, and we always say the same thing. Because of being born and growing up, soon as our families came to this country, we were obviously American because we were born in this country. But I can't say that we had the American mentality because we grew up in a traditional household. Now, yes, we're Albanian because our blood is Albanian, but we weren't born in Albania. So it seems like we were caught up between both worlds.
Right.
And I think it molded me into who I am, and I wouldn't change it for the entire universe. I grew up with my grandfather, my grandmother, may they both rest in peace. My
You
parents,
live with them in their home?
we lived in the same building, 4 families in the Bronx.
Nice.
We lived in the basement. My father and my mother, me, my sister was born. And I had 2 other siblings. They were born a little bit later. So we all lived in the same building. My parents worked, and my grandfather, being that I was his oldest grandson that bore his last name, took me everywhere with him. Or when his friends came over during the day, because you had as we used to call them, the old men would come over. They weren't working. And they would play dominoes and chess and cards, or even just sit around and drink coffee and smoke a million cigarettes. And he would make me sit there, never allowed to say a word, but just listen. And not to toot my own horn, my Albanian is fluent. I do speak the dialect, just se shaljan, se familjen e kam prej shaljet. But I know a lot of the traditions too. I mean, I sit down with people now and I tell them stories that I remember from back then about the old days, about the old heroes, about the old ways, even about the kanun.
Yeah,
because
the Besa.
Yeah, also my family is from Dukajin. Shalja's in Dukajin, and we like to say that that's the birthplace of the kanun. Kanuni lek Dukajinit. So it was instilled in me from a young age. It gave me a love for law, for regulations, governing behavior, governing the way people interact. And
well, that makes sense with the origins of the next question is what drew you to law.
That drew me to the law, but my grandfather, again, rest in peace, he would get called in a lot for these sit-downs that happened back in the days.
Wow.
Back
I always wanted to know about that, how they actually work.
It was amazing to see.
And how did they choose your grandfather?
Because he was the plyak. He was the oldest family.
The wisest.
Oldest. Yeah. Not necessarily the wisest. They chose people that were wise. I don't want to toot, again, my own family's, value and stuff, but they would choose the oldest people. Now, he was known for being wise, but they would choose the different people, and there would be a dispute, for example, between 2 different families.
Yeah.
Okay? They were new to the country. They didn't want to go to the police. They didn't know about the courts or anything like that. They didn't want to be like, as we used to say, spiona. Here they would say like to be a rat. So you would get 2 families together.
Yeah.
And it could have been something as simple as a slight at a wedding, some words.
Misunderstanding.
Okay, a misunderstanding, all the way to a blood feud.
Right.
I've never seen the sit-down of the blood feud. I was too young. My grandfather, I remember coming back from one of those, and he told us what had happened. Okay, and no offense to you, he only told the men.
That's
back
fine.
then. I'm going back.
That time period.
It was a different time. They had just come over and they were still using the customs and traditions from their own place. So anyway, I seen a couple of these and I would hear them cross-examining a person to get to the truth.
So they were trial lawyers, essentially.
Essentially. You would hear one side of the story and you would think that side was 100% right.
So you heard the other side.
But then you heard the other side. And then you came to realize something that we as lawyers have ingrained in us. There's three sides to every story.
Right.
There's, for example, your side.
Yeah.
There's your side.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the middle lies the truth. Okay. And as a lawyer, you need to probe. And obviously, it would be decided by the elders amongst themselves. Okay. And the elders had besa. They were sort of like judges, actually, not just lawyers, because they were sworn to deliver justice there. And if that justice was against your own, as we say, our mashkuliyut.
And this was here in America.
This was here in America. Yeah, I wasn't born over there.
Yeah.
So I'm talking just about here in America. Yeah. This was a long time ago. I haven't seen.
What years we're talking about?
Oh, God, we're talking about
80s?
In the late 70s.
80s, early 80s?
To the mid 80s, I would say, maybe even some to the late 80s, but it was dying out by the mid to the late 80s.
Wow.
Albanians started becoming more savvy. A new generation came up.
Right.
You got to understand, all of this was predicated on what you mentioned before, besa, your word.
Yeah.
When those men came to that table, they gave their besa to each other that they were going to listen to the facts and they were going to decide it together and they were going to decide it based on the facts, not old grudges. Okay.
No emotions.
No emotions.
Yeah.
Just facts.
Yeah.
So, the besa started dying out a little bit.
Yeah.
So when you had the new generations coming in, it wasn't, and I'm not taking any shots at the newer generation. It's not worse.
No, but
it's different.
I'm gonna agree with you there because I want to ask you this question. Has besa really truly died out now?
I'm not going to say that it's died out. There's plenty of people out there that still, their word is their word and besa is besa. And honestly, it may sound dramatic to some, but they'd even give their life for their besa. But
now?
Now. But that number has decreased exponentially. Whereas before...
Non-existent.
I wouldn't say non-existent.
You can't say non-existent.
No, I wouldn't say that. There's still people out there. There's still people out there that whose word is their bond. But
very few.
Back then that I'm referring
to 1% probably.
I wouldn't disagree with that.
When you give your besa, do you keep to it?
Yeah,
so
I'm probably one of the
1%. So that means it's not
less than
the funny thing is, if you ask any Albanian, they'll tell you that they're part of the 1%.
Yeah.
There. But what I was saying is, back then, the vast majority, let's say 95%.
Yeah.
The besa was good.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas now, if you want to put a percentage on it, I guess 95% is not good.
Yeah.
So it changed. It changed, but it also changed because they became more savvy. I don't know if that's good or bad. Because now you have Albanians suing each other.
Yeah.
You have Albanians taking each other to court.
Yeah.
You have a lot of things like that. Whereas back then, families got together and that was done. I remember specifically one time there was one sit down in my grandfather's house. Okay. My family, the Gjelaj family, it's a very big family. There was a fight at the wedding and a bad fight. And you don't do that. At an Albanian wedding,
disrespectful.
That is disrespectful.
Yeah.
And it really messed up the wedding. One of the guys pulled out a gun.
Oh my God.
It was stopped. No shots were fired, but now there was a problem.
Yeah.
Okay. So
how do you change that energy back to celebration?
Thank God it was at the end of the night. It was right before the cake was cut. So it was towards the end of the wedding. But I'll be honest with you, when the cake was cut that night, and I was young, but I remember this vividly. Barely anybody was around the dance floor watching them, cut the cake or anything like that. It was just ruined. So anyway, they come to my grandfather's house the next day because with Albanians, you don't wait.
Yeah.
All right. You have to nip it in the bud.
Yeah.
They came there, both sides. Okay. And we knew basically, without mentioning names or anything, that one side was completely in the wrong.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandfather telling both sides that if you want to settle your problem with us, because as you know, they owed us something. They messed up our wedding.
Yeah.
We were looking for Jack. My family's not savages, but you understand.
Right. You have to pay.
You have to pay.
Yeah.
And I remember my grandfather telling them, if you want to owe us nothing, I want both sides to come to an agreement and to stop the squabbling.
Yeah.
Okay. But the besa was that if that problem ever erupted again, my grandfather and my family were the ones that had to regulate that. That was part of the deal that they made. Okay.
What does that mean?
It means that if one side
restarted this fight again.
Restarted the feud, we were responsible. Not that side that that, you know.
Oh, so you
That they
put your name now on the line.
We put our name down on the line.
Wow.
Okay. That was one I remember specifically.
And did your grandfather
what kind
agree
of
to
power
it?
My grandfather's the one that proposed it
Oh,
because he
wow.
wanted peace.
Right.
At the end of the day, he wanted peace.
You see,
So now, if there's feuds between women, did they still go to your grandfather, or is
My grandfather passed away a while ago, but
not then, back then?
yeah, the women didn't go to the men.
so-
the women went to their husband or to their father or
And
to
then
their
it would-
brother,
and
and
then it
then
would have
they
been
went
I got
to them. And it wasn't, I keep saying my grandfather, that's just an example.
Right.
He wasn't like the main person
No,
that they went to.
there's few.
Yeah.
There were a lot back
Yeah.
then. You had some, and it was amazing to hear these people's mentality. Without a day of school, my grandfather wrote his name with an X.
I'm telling you, these are wise
Okay?
men. They were
And
wise
the
men.
things that were coming out of these guys' mouths and the way that they were able to evaluate situations, it was awe-inspiring. And that really, some people say I took after my grandfather because he was very probative like that.
Yeah.
And he did these kind of things. If I'm half the man he was, I'll be happy.
So, in your opinion today, are any of those men left that take that role? Maybe not in that such deep level as you mentioned back then, but maybe in a more consultative way to fix problems that arise within the community.
I think it's more difficult now. There are some, but I think it's much more difficult because back the time that I'm talking about, remember, the Albanian community was nowhere near as big as it is now.
Yeah.
And everybody knew each other.
Yeah.
You know, I'll give you an example. My brother-in-law, my sister's husband, I remember since being a little boy saying hello to his family at the Albanian church. Okay, we weren't related at all. Obviously, he married my sister.
Yeah.
But I remember his family like being a little boy and saying hello to his father at church. You know, or my father yelling at me, "Nepia Doren,"
Yeah.
you know, something like that. And it's become, so I knew who he was. And if I had, let's say, hypothetically, just started a problem and he was a person that was one of those old men, I would respect that because I knew who he was. And I think that's one of the reasons why you don't have as many of these men anymore. The community's too big.
It's too big, and it's not as united as it used to be when the first immigrants came, where they only had each other to survive.
We needed each other back then to survive. And unfortunately these days, or fortunately, depending on the way you look at it, Albanians don't need each other as much anymore in order to survive. You know, they come here, they have their cousins, they have their families, they have their spouses' families, and they'll help them, you know, get acclimated, but they don't need the Albanian community.
But also nowadays, people who are coming from over there, they're actually coming to this country with a ready knowledge of what they need to do, where they need to go, how to get Medicaid, how to navigate the system before even stepping foot in the country. Because just social media helped a lot, and just the internet helped
Social
a lot.
media, the internet, obviously.
Yeah.
I remember
Of doing all the research prior to coming.
I remember the first time my father saw me on AOL. The dial-up. And he asked me, "What is this?" And when I explained it to him, he said, "This is going to be the fall of civilization."
I think he might be right.
Well, by the way, he still doesn't know how to use the internet.
So, Nick, let me ask you, what made you go into construction litigation?
I can answer that very simply. When I was, my father was a porter / doorman for 32 BJ. He was in that union for 40 years. And when I was about 16 years old, my father fell off of a ladder and he got severely injured. He was never able to return to work again.
Oh, wow.
I saw what it did to my family. My father's a very, very proud man. I think I saw him cry. I don't think he cried when his father died. I saw him cry when his mother died. But other than that, I saw him cry when he was out of work and he was confused as to
He didn't know how to provide for his family.
how to provide for his family. And I remember dealing with lawyers back then because he didn't speak English well. He still doesn't speak English well.
Yeah.
And having to speak to his different lawyers to try to coordinate everything. And it was impossible. It was really difficult. And I always swore to myself that if whatever profession I chose, and I had my heart set on law then, but I always swore to myself that whatever profession I chose, I wasn't going to be that lawyer that I was calling up. And basically having to say, if you don't call me back, I'm going to find a lawyer that does. I also swore that I would be able to help the Albanian people by speaking their language. You know, I had a case early on in my career, I'll never forget. He was from Montenegro, the man, construction workers, injured really, really badly. And his lawyer told him, "You're going to lose the case." He had a lawyer before he had me. "You're going to lose the case." Someone told him to give me a call. Got him into my office. I had this really powerful boss back then that I worked for. It was my first job out of law school. And we sat down. He was an expert in construction law. He just passed away, actually. He was a big mentor of mine. And we sat down. And because of a few words that the translator they had hired, because this lawyer did not speak Albanian, it turned on to like 3 words of whether he had a case or not. And those, either he didn't say it, he was too shy, the interpreter didn't understand it, or it was misinterpreted. But based on that, he was told he had no case. I took over the case, obviously, and we got him several $1 million. And to this day, actually, that was like 21, 22 years ago, he moved back to Montenegro after his case was done, and he sends me a card for New Year's every year.
Very nice. He should send you more than a card.
Well, no, that's fine. That's fine. I have no complaints. I get paid enough. You know, in this business, I always say to people, and I tell my young associates too that work for me, you know, money comes and money goes. You need to have a pure heart, and you have to be able to give back and help people.
Right. Well, you need to have that heart to give back. So,
and you've secured hundreds of millions of settlements for injured workers. So just think about how much impact you've had in people's lives and their families.
I've been blessed. I really, you know, I take pleasure in getting those cards every year. Or I used to get the phone calls once in a while from an old client. Now they'll shoot me a text or something. Okay. But I always smile when I see that. Hey, Nick, just checking in. Wanted to let you know that me and my family are doing great. Thank you. You know, of course, thank you. And I really, really enjoy that.
But going back to your father and what he was feeling at that time after, you know, he realized he can't work anymore. He can't provide for his family. That emotional toll, it really takes a huge impact, not only his life, but also just in his family's lives. Because that's how they used to feel like their contribution, right? Their value was based on what they can provide.
I think that experience that I went through there, it not only gave me a passion for the law, it's actually helped me in the courtroom. I try cases. Not a lot of lawyers do. I go into the courtroom, I pick the jury, do the opening statement, the things you see on TV, although a trial is nothing like you see on TV. It's long and it's grueling. But most of my clients are either Albanian construction workers or Spanish construction workers or union construction workers, okay? And I'm able to relay their story to a jury, not just because of what I've read on paper.
Because you lived through it.
Because I lived through it, okay?
You have emotions.
I have emotions. I remember. I remember my father speaking to my mother and trying to hide it from us so we wouldn't hear, like, you know, grua, kurblje harj neser, mas harjashum pora. Like, I remember hearing that stuff. You know, I remember seeing my father walk around the house not knowing what the hell to do with himself. Because like you said, there's a value. It's not just the money. It's the value. He felt basically like an invalid at that time. So I think it's helped me a lot in my ability to relay my client's pain and suffering to a jury. Because at the end of the day, that's what I have to do. I ask a jury. There's no guilty, not guilty in what I do. It's either the jury says that somebody was at fault for the accident and then gives the appropriate amount of money depending on the injuries, or they don't. So I think it's given me the ability to be able to relay that.
So not only now you're speaking Albanian to your Albanian clients, but you also learn Spanish through representing your Spanish clients as well.
I understand so much Spanish; it's unbelievable. I don't speak it. I think that's my next goal if I ever get the time to do it. But you know, I have Spanish paralegals who will sit there to translate for me, and I would say 50-60% of the time after my client gives a long answer, and it's not just like "sí." You know, I mean, a real answer. And I will say to them, entiendo. I understand. No need to translate. And they joke about it. Like they say to each other, we can't talk about Nick behind his back in Spanish because he'll understand everything.
So, Nick, let me ask you, how has the labor law evolved over the years? And what are the most pressing issues construction workers face today?
Okay, so the labor law, it's a fancy term because, you know, people think about labor law in terms of like unions and collective bargaining. That is labor law. That's different. The labor law I'm referring to is the law that governs construction workers and construction accidents. We're one of the only states in the United States that have this type of protection for construction workers. And the reason is, you ever take a look at Manhattan or here in Brooklyn, we're in downtown Brooklyn. No state in the union and no city has as much construction as New York City in terms of high rises. And back in the days, they say that when the Empire State Building was built, that every floor that the building went up, one worker died.
Wow.
You ever seen the famous
Yeah.
picture of the iron workers on the beam?
Yep.
They're not tied off anywhere.
Yeah.
That's the way they worked back then. So what we do is we protect injured workers. And yes, of course, I represent injured workers, but it means more than that. I actually educate workers on safety. I'm OSHA certified.
Okay.
I have my OSHA 10. And I do workshops and clinics where you'll never hear me say, oh, come to me if you get hurt, this and that. That is tacky. That's blood money in my mind. I'm blessed at this point. I will tell you how important your harness is. I will tell you how important it is to tie off when you're at a leading edge. I will tell you your rights. Okay, and that extends to undocumented workers too. I'm not here to get into politics about migration. I deal with reality.
Right.
The reality is that there's a ton of undocumented workers that work in New York City. Okay, and if they were that bad, then the employer shouldn't be hiring them. But they do. They do because they want cheaper labor. So I tell them, guess what? You're undocumented. You get hurt. You have the same rights as me, and I'm an American citizen.
Yeah.
Okay. If somebody tells you you're going to get deported because you got into an accident, that's not true. Although I must preface this.
Yeah.
We're all in a gray area right now.
It could
with
change.
Trump president. So I'm going to preface that, lest anyone looks at this and says that I'm giving bad advice. Okay. But the bottom line is I speak to them about their rights, and I educate. I've educated a lot of Albanians on their rights. I've grabbed construction workers on the street that I saw had an Albanian eagle and told them, you can do this, you can do that, masbakta.
Yeah. But on that topic though, do you think there's a little bit over exaggeration on the safety measures that OSHA has implemented?
No, not at all.
Which can handicap the production?
No, you can never have profits over safety. That's not about business. That's about being a human being. People's safety, it's paramount.
I agree to safety. I'm saying you don't think there's any over exaggeration on that?
I don't think so, because we're talking about people's lives. It would be like saying, is there an over-exaggeration for a factory to have safeguards that are in addition to what OSHA mandates? You're talking about human lives, and I don't think you can ever sacrifice anything for that. You got to build it into the cost then. That's the bottom line. You got to factor it into the cost. But if you see some of the conditions that these people work in, I'm talking about the undocumented, because the unions, thank God, they're strong in New York. They have the proper protections. They can go to a shop steward or a business representative, complain, and things happen. Right. But with the undocumented workers, we're talking about a harness and before. Yeah. I had a client one time told me that he was given a lasso, a rope.
Okay.
A rope that he tied around himself. It was tied to a piece of wood, which a tie-off point has to be tested. It's got to withstand your weight times 4.
4, okay.
Okay, and then a big lasso. Now, that guy didn't get hurt. I didn't have him for that, but that would have been horrific if he would have fell with a lasso around himself. So if you don't regulate that, let me change it around. Even with the regulations we have now, it's still dangerous. You take away those protections, it's going to be catastrophic.
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest misconceptions people have about construction accidents, litigations, labor law? You hear sometimes stories even at a coffee shop where they're like, oh, he got hurt. He's the one who hurt himself, and now he's suing me.
Yeah.
What?
Do you
what
see
are
any
some
abuse in that?
I do see abuse. Yeah. Okay. I personally, I don't handle cases that way. And it's happened over the years.
Yeah.
Where either I've seen something that caused me to pause, or listen, as a lawyer, we're trained to, for lack of a better term, to sniff.
Right.
Okay. I sniffed stuff. Okay. Right there.
Okay.
First of all,
we have to.
If it's your fault, you're not winning. You're not going to prevail. You're going to lose, because in these construction cases, they're high stakes, and the lawyers are on the other side. We trial lawyers, we all have egos. I think I'm the best thing out there. Okay. But those defense lawyers on the insurance side, they're just as good, if not better. And they will sniff
workers'
it
comp
Well, workers' comp is something separate. I handle the lawsuit part. But one thing that I really think is a common misconception among Albanians is they think that just because, for argument's sake, you break your pinky, you're going to get millions of dollars. That doesn't happen. I don't care who told you that in the cafe. Okay? I don't care who told you that outside the church or the mosque.
So wait, Nick, hold on. What would it take for a person to make $1 million? Like a limit?
No, respectfully, I don't want to answer that question in that way. But if I can rephrase it for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, please.
Listen, I hope you never have a 7-figure construction accident because that would
Okay.
mean that you're injured.
Yeah.
You know, I have one plaque on my wall. It's $20-something million, and people say, "Oh my God, how do I get that kind of money?" Well, you need to be in a wheelchair and paralyzed from your neck down.
Oh my
Do you want
God.
that?
Right,
Yeah.
Okay.
exactly.
You know, I have
That's-
spine surgeries, neck surgeries, broken bones. You know, people that are legitimately hurt. I'm going to tell you right now, if you have a good job, okay, and you get hurt and it's not that major, dust yourself off, go to the clinic. You should always document it, that if possible, that
Yeah.
very day. But if you're not that hurt, recover and go back to work. Okay, especially if you got a good job, because you're not walking away from a job. You're walking away from a career. You're walking away from your ability to feed your family. Because if you do have a lawsuit, it's going to take 3, 4, 5 years, and you got to make do for those
Yeah.
those years, and it's not worth it. So I know that there are a lot of Albanians out
You
there.
have to also, up front, you have to give retainers sometimes,
Oh,
right?
but well, the retainers are like, and it's nothing unusual for me. It's what all personal injury lawyers do. You don't pay us a retainer. We get paid at the very end of the case.
Oh,
So that's another thing. Actually, that's a good question, because you said, you know, about people whose fault it is. You know, because of the fact that I don't get paid until that person gets
Right.
paid,
You need to ensure that.
I'm careful with what I accept.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's not just the time, and believe me, my payroll is ridiculous, and my overhead. I have an office in the Trump Building at 40 Wall Street. Rent is high. It's the money that gets put into these cases.
Yeah.
You know, in construction cases, by the time it reaches trial, forget about trial where you're talking about a few $100,000 in expenses, but I'm shelling out 30, 40, 50,000 without any return. I'm in the negative. So it's to my benefit to make sure that if it's the person's fault, I'm not taking the case. Okay.
Have you refused cases in the
Many
past?
times.
Yeah.
There's a joke now. Because I reached a certain level of success, I've become very, very boutiquey, as you say.
Very picky.
That's exactly it. Some people have started calling me Picky Nicky.
That's
Okay.
a good nickname.
Out of 5 cases, I probably reject half that are
Wow.
presented to me.
Right. Wow. Okay. I do also want to mention that you are the co-vice chair of the New York State Trial Lawyers Association Labor Law Committee. Tell us a little bit about that.
Okay, so the New York State Trial Lawyers Association it's probably the most powerful state bar association in the country. It's made of thousands of members, some extremely high-level lawyers, and in my role, besides going to Albany and speaking to legislators, going to their district offices, speaking to them about any possible, because you got to remember, there's always a constant battle in
Yeah.
Albany with competing interests, and the competing interests for the trial lawyers would be the insurance companies or the contractors.
Right.
All right. And the legislators, they got to try to be fair. And sometimes there's misconceptions out there. There's press conferences that we want to rebut. So I work in that aspect as well to make sure that the labor law stays the way it is and to try to advance workers' rights. But also, I co-chair a lecture every year. It's the most popular lecture that the trial lawyers do. We trial lawyers have to have 16 credits of continuing legal education per year. Me too. And we have to do it. That one gives you, I think, 8, and it's the most popular one that we have. And we have probably 50, 60 that we do in a year. That one's the most popular. We have the best speakers. We have judges, and we teach lawyers. And I've had, I think the last one I did, we had about 10 judges. Supreme Court's the entry level. You have civil court, which is for like lower cases,
Right.
then Supreme, then the appellate divisions, then the Court of Appeals. So the Supreme Court judges were at that lecture, I think about 10 of them. And we had an appeals court judge lecturing there as well. So I teach other lawyers and judges about the current state of construction law, and I follow it religiously.
Do you influence any new law, or do you make like recommendations to the existing laws?
Through the committee, we do. Okay. I don't do anything on my own. It's the New York State Trial Lawyers.
Right,
We have one message. We are unified. We have a president, vice president, all those things. Right now, our president is Victoria Wickham.
Okay.
Fine president, fine attorney. And we talk about those things. We have lobbyists also on
Okay.
retainer. So we speak about that, and then one voice.
So essentially, you're an influence in that.
Yes. As a lobbying group,
Yeah.
the trial lawyers are very powerful in Albany.
Yeah. Wow. Okay.
Some legal firms are using AI powered tools to assess the strength of a case and even draft some legal documents. Do you think that AI will ever replace some aspects of a lawyer's job or even a paralegal?
I could see it maybe taking some of the slack off of a paralegal. I personally don't use AI. Not for the law. For other stuff, yes. But for the law, I don't. Writing, never. There have been attorneys, I think on 3 or 4 occasions nationwide, that have been sanctioned because when you write to a judge, when you write legally, and you say, for example, this table is brown or whatever color this is, you have to cite authority for that. Your word is not good enough. So you'll say, for example, C case, blah, 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 blah. AI is not sophisticated enough to put in the correct cites. The courts, they pull. The judge has a court attorney. They pull the cases that are cited, and they didn't match up. They got sanctioned for that.
Wow.
Okay. Nobody's lost their law license yet, but if that person messes up again, I'm sure it's going to be in trouble. So I don't let my attorneys use AI in the office, except there's a lot of medicals involved in my practice too. I'm dealing with people that are injured, have had multiple surgeries. We do use AI. I don't know how to do it. Okay, I have other people do it. They use AI to digest medical records and give a chronology.
And,
okay.
Yeah, and just to understand.
To assist.
Yeah.
To assist. Yeah. But even that, I haven't.
You have to still cross-check and make sure.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's difficult because, everybody thinks that law is black and white. It's not. It's gray. And AI, I think, deals more with black and white than it does with gray.
You also chair the Independent Judiciary Screening Committee for the Bronx Democratic Party.
Yes, I do.
Tell us a little bit about that and what that role entails.
Okay, so every year, my committee that I head up, we screen applicants for civil court in the Bronx. Now, in the Bronx, you can't become Supreme right away. You have to go civil first. I guess spend a few years there, then you get Supreme. You have to be screened by my committee, which comprises the various bar associations. When I first took over, most of the people on that committee looked like me, white men.
Okay.
That's not what it looks like now.
Okay.
Okay.
DNI?
Well, no, not just that.
What?
The judiciary has to reflect the population it represents.
Okay.
If we were back in Albania, would we want, let's say, a Bulgarian? And please, if anybody's listening, I'm not. I just chose that off the top of my head. Would you want a Bulgarian?
No, of course not.
Okay, so the Black, the Latinos in the Bronx are the vast majority of the people there. The judges for the last 10, 15 years have been mostly Black and Latinos.
Okay.
What do 9 old white men know about the community that they're going to serve? That was a project of mine when I first went in there. All right. So now I'm going to tell you what the committee is comprised of now. Somebody from the Bronx Women's Bar Association, the Black Bar Association, the Dominican Bar Association, the Puerto Rican Bar Association, the Bronx County Bar Association. Okay. We have Asian Bar Association. And there's not a lot of Asians in the Bronx, but we included them.
Right.
Okay. LGBT. They're included also.
Okay.
That is what my committee is now. It's diverse. They're almost all of them are Bronx residents or have grown up in the Bronx. And when I say, for example, Dominican Bar Association, I will send an email to whoever the president is now at the time and say, introduce myself if I don't know them, and say who I am and what we're doing, and that I need somebody from their organization, preferably someone who's either grown up with or currently lives in the Bronx. Send them over. And I got to tell you, I remember that first year I started compared to we did it in early February. The types of questions that were being posed to the candidates, they're amazing because they're people that actually live in the community or have lived in the community. So they come in, they have a 30-page application that they have to fill out. Okay, that's not even including exhibits because they're supposed to put in decisions and things like that. And some of the questions, they can be personal. Have you ever been, had an ethical violation or things like that? Have you ever been in arrears on taxes? Your history, this and that.
Right.
But then we sit there because it's not just about what's on paper. One of the things that we're looking at is judicial temperament. How are you going to be when you're on the bench?
Right.
Okay. And it's not a long.
Do you test them out?
Yeah, of course we do.
How do you do that?
Absolutely. You ask a probing question. Okay, you ask a probing question.
Give me a question.
Well,
probe us a little.
It's not always. You know what it is. It's not always what you ask. It's how you ask it.
Right.
You're challenging their ego because every professional has an ego to some extent or other. You're challenging their ego.
Do you play with their emotions?
No, That I don't do. I don't play with their emotions because it's not about emotions. You know, the one question that everyone gets asked, and I have no problem stating this here, is if a law is presented to you and it conflicts with your personal or religious beliefs, what do you do? And the answer there is supposed to be, I have to follow the law as it's given to me. Okay?
This is why I wouldn't be a good lawyer.
Even
Because
if they
for
don't
me,
agree with it?
I would go by my
Excuse me?
principles
I'm
and
sorry.
values.
Even if they don't agree with it?
Even if you don't agree with it. That sometimes is my follow-up question, actually. If the person will say, well, I'll follow the law as it's given to me, even if you don't agree with it. That's my follow-up a lot of times to them. Okay? And these are the kind of people that we need on the bench.
Yeah.
You know, have you ever seen Lady Justice, the statue or the
Yeah.
All right, so Lady Justice is there. Okay, she's got a sword. She wields justice with her sword. She's got scales.
Right.
And if you look at them, they're dead equal because we all are equal before the law. But she also has a blindfold on.
Yeah.
And that blindfold means that justice is blind.
Right.
Okay. I may not agree with your position, but if the law says that it's allowed, if I was a judge, I have a duty.
But what if the law is wrong?
You have a duty.
So how do you challenge the law and try to present it to make some changes?
That's
to the
Albany.
law?
That's the separation of
Oh, that's what you took before.
that's the separation of powers in this great country, and why some of the controversy is going on now. You have the executive, you have the legislative, and you have the judicial. And judicial is supposed to stay above all of it. A judge is not allowed to get involved in politics. They can vote, of course they can. They can have their beliefs, but they're not allowed to attend a political event.
What if for those people that say law is up to the perception, can be interpreted in different ways? How do you argue that?
It 100% can get interpreted in different ways. And that's why
So
you
it's
have
not cut clear.
It's not cut clear. And we were talking about labor law, for example. I'll use that. The labor law evolves every day. And the reason it evolves is because the appellate courts interpret cases in a certain way. And that's our law. Because a law can get given to us by the legislature. It's the courts that matter to us. How do they interpret that law? Is it broad like this, or is it narrow like this? So somebody like me, who's a labor law junkie, I read those cases every week when they come out. Okay, so you're right. It can be open to interpretation. I mean, let's think about this, for example. There was a case, God, I can't cite it because it's a U.S. Supreme Court case that said, in terms of race, separate is equal.
Okay.
You can separate the races. That was in the mid-1800s. I think it was Plessy versus Ferguson, if I'm not mistaken. I hope I got that right.
We can't fact check.
So
here.
basically, you can. I don't care. It's fine. I'm not perfect.
No, we can. Later, we're going to fact check.
I'm sure the viewer as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, they would say separate, white, black is equal.
But equal, yeah.
Fast forward to Board versus Brown of Education in the 1960s. That's not the case anymore. There's something in the Constitution of the United States which has been adopted by, I think, every state constitution. It's called the elasticity clause. What our founders did, and they had a lot of faults, our founders, but they had some great, great principles. Our Constitution was written for this time, in the mid-1700s. We can't envision what's going to happen in the future. And rather than be rigid, we have an elastic clause, which will allow us to expand some of these rights.
And to evolve.
And to evolve into the way society evolves.
Right. So to me, essentially, it's a game of words. If you choose the right words, it can be interpreted either way.
I don't know if I would put it that way. It's the way you frame something.
Right.
Okay. You got to frame something a certain way. And I use this as an example because, like I said, I teach a lot too. So you have to frame something in a certain way. If you were coming to my office the first time and you were looking to retain me as a lawyer and you said, "Hey, Nick, are you a good lawyer?" And I said, "I'm a good lawyer." You're not gonna sign up with me. You're not gonna hire me. But if you said, "Nick, are you a good lawyer?" Same exact words. "Yes, I'm a good lawyer." I framed it a different way. I framed it in the way where you're going to be more confident.
So you're talking about psychology now.
It's everything. That's what I'm saying. It's not just words. It's everything. Okay, it's society evolving.
Body language. It's
but also 30, 40, 50 years ago, you would have never in a million years thought about the gay rights that exist today. Okay? But they do. because of the elasticity, because of society, because of societal norms.
So let me ask you this: if you could change one thing about the legal system to better protect workers, right? What would it be?
I would change the workers' comp system. You know, and in order to explain this, I have to explain the interplay. So when somebody gets injured, regardless of faults at all, they're entitled to workers' compensation. That means your wages plus your medical bills being paid. I handle the third-party action, the lawsuit. I sue the owner and the general contractor. You can't sue your employer in New York State. You're not allowed. So if you're hurt at work, regardless of faults, okay, the only qualification is that you be a paid employee on whatever job site. You're entitled to your wages and your medical bills to be paid. I handle the lawsuits. I sue the owner and the general contractor and any other contractor that may be involved, but not your employer, because in New York State, you're not allowed to sue your employer. The only remedy is receiving workers' compensation. But unfortunately, the workers' compensation system, it's broken. You know, they're denying claims that are legitimate. Okay. They're reducing wages. They're basically trying to force workers.
Do they have that power to do that?
They can, because they have judges. And then you have a right to appeal it. There's so many archaic rules that exist. And by the way, these are the rules that affected my father way back when.
Right.
All right.
They're still around.
And they're still around. They haven't been revamped at all. The insurance industry, they won't allow a revampment of it. And I'm sure if somebody from the insurance industry was watching this, they would say, you're a trial lawyer. That's why you're saying that. I've seen people, okay, and it happens a lot at the beginning of a case. Person gets injured. They're used to making, let's say, $800 a week. They have a wife. They have 2 kids at home. Insurance company will stall that initial payment to them, okay? Or maybe give them a few hundred. Now, your right is to request a hearing before workers' compensation, okay? If they're paying you, even if it's minimal money, you got to wait months for that hearing. The only time you can request an expedited hearing is if they're not paying you at all. So the insurance company knows that. They'll give you something low, and they're hoping, the whole goal is that 5, 6, 7, 8 months are going to go by, and you're going to say, you know something, I just can't deal with this anymore.
Settle.
I don't care
how much they give you.
I don't care how much pain I'm in or whatever.
I have to go back to work.
I have to go back to work. And I've seen people do that. And as a lawyer, it's unethical and illegal for me to provide compensation to my clients. I've never given a client a penny in their life, other than their settlement money, obviously. I'm not allowed to do that. So it becomes almost like a tug of war. And I've seen some good people suffer bad injuries, bad pain. You know, it's not just the person that says, oh, my neck hurts, and they're not approving stuff. I've seen people with horrific fractures who needed a surgery. I got a client now. He broke his wrist, okay? He needed surgery within the first, I think, 3 weeks of his accident. They would not approve it. No doctor would do it. I tried to get doctors to do it on a lien where we agreed to pay them at the end of the case. They wouldn't do it because it was workers' comp. They approve it like 6 weeks later. He goes to an orthopedic surgeon and he says, it's too late. I can't do this surgery. And now he's got what's called an angulation for the rest of his life. His bone is sticking out like this. He's got limited range of motion, and it could have all been eliminated if they would have given him the treatment. And I can tell you this much. That broken wrist, because I've had hundreds of clients with broken wrists with surgery, would have kept him out of work maybe 3-4 months, and he would have went back. Now, he might not ever be able to go back to work because of that. And that's what the system does. Full disclosure, there's a lot of fraud that goes on too.
Yeah,
I will admit it.
I mean, I worked in the emergency department for over 10 years. Just seeing some of the patients that came in, you can clearly see who are legit versus who are just
faking.
And I don't often speak on behalf of the New York State trial lawyers because, as I explained to you, we have like a process. On this regard, I can easily speak for them. We condone fraud of any kind whatsoever. If there's fraud out there, we want those people caught. We want those doctors, lawyers, clients, patients, we want them arrested. We want them punished. Okay? We don't condone it at all. I'm talking about the cases where people are legitimately hurt. And I get that there's a problem at the Workers' Comp Board because they've taken the view now that no matter what, we're going to call it a fraud, and now you prove that it's not.
Right.
That's not what the system was designed for.
That way.
It should be designed that the case is established. If you suspect fraud, go after the person for fraud. There's remedies for that. If somebody commits fraud on the Workers' Comp and they're found liable, they have to pay back every penny. Okay, it's a civil judgment.
So let me ask you on that topic. Let's say a client came to you and you clearly can sniff out, like you said, that is trying to fraud the system. What is your duty to do in that case?
I have to withdraw from the case.
But would you report that?
I can't. I'm not allowed to.
See, that's a problem.
That's
No.
called lawyer-client privilege.
So-
It's sacred. I could lose my law license if I gave him up. I mean, to take it to the extreme, if I was a criminal attorney and my client told me that he committed the murder, I can't tell anybody. It's my duty.
It's the same in the healthcare. We
Yeah.
have the HIPAA law.
I could never-
where you can't disclose people's
Yeah,
health
but
information.
if you're trying to prevent fraud, why wouldn't you call that out?
So-
So the reason why I say this is because this will never end then. You're always going to have people that are always going to try to scheme the system or fraud the system if they're not being accountable.
So I can't, like I told you, I can't legally, ethically, whatever, however you want to look at it. I could lose my lawyer license. I can't say anything. Now, think about this. I have a client who I smell some fraud,
Yeah.
and I drop his case. Okay, and you
There's
may pick
another
up his
lawyer.
case.
Yeah.
You're going to call me. All right,
Mm-hmm.
you're going to call me,
And
and you're going to say, Nick, why'd you drop the case?
right.
No, I can't give you the exact reason. I can tell you, something. You know me for a while, or you know who I am, or something like that. Stay away from this case. Just trust me on that.
So you give them codes or hints.
It's not so much a code. I'm basically telling him, don't get involved in this case at all.
But that could be also a signal for another lawyer to say, why did that case get dropped? It's something might be, fishy there.
A lot of people. So I don't often take cases from other lawyers. I don't like doing that unless I see that the lawyer doesn't know what he's doing and the client's suffering. I don't like that. Most of the time, people complain because of lack of communication or poor communication, something like that.
So you still do your homework before you.
I do. And you know who the really good firms are in New York City. If it
Right.
came from a certain firm and they dropped it, my antennas are going to be up.
Yeah.
Big
So
time.
how do you know if they dropped the case or if a client went to a different lawyer? Is there like
Well, I'll speak to the client. I mean, or
only if they disclose it to you?
I'll check the client on the court system too.
Okay.
Okay. Now that's a little bit more difficult because, especially with Latino clients, the names get mixed up
Names, yeah.
sometimes and everything. But before anybody comes to my office, we check the court system. Unless the accident happened like the day before or a week before, we check the court system. We have access to the court system in all the borough, in the entire state actually, and we'll look for that.
So
Right.
let me ask you a little bit about the Albanian community here.
Mhm.
I don't think there's a law association in our community or organization that I know of. I don't think there is a law bar association for the Albanian community, as far as I know, or an organization that represents all the Albanian lawyers to kind of get together.
There isn't, and it's something that I've been trying to advocate for years now. I haven't been able to get enough people on board. I mean, listen, you write a lot about what I do. I only have so much time.
Yeah.
I still have 2 children also.
Yeah.
Okay. My mother and father that live with me. So it's not like I can do everything. And it's something that's overdue. Last year, former councilman and former state assemblyman Mark Jonai and I, we established or began establishing an organization to do some pro bono legal work for Albanians.
Okay.
The idea was to go around the communities and give free legal services. For example, maybe get one of those buses or something like that and go to the mosque in Staten Island, let's say, and stay there for after services and just help. I mean, it doesn't have to be legal advice. It could be something like, an old lady coming to read or to translate something for me. I told you before I had the law office at the beginning of my career on Lydic Avenue. I can't tell you the number of people that would come in there. Older people, fresh off the boat from Albania or Montenegro, Kosovo. All they needed was just, I got this thing in the mail. What is it? I remember this I remember this old lady one time. God, she's probably dead now. God rest her soul. She was so sweet. She was wearing the rub and everything. She was walking up the street, praying the rosaries, but she looked like worried. So I looked at her, and I was always taught to respect my elders. And I looked at her. She was much older than me, and I called her Nun. I go, Nun, pse po mrzitesh nešto? And she goes, I'm kvar kjo letër në postë, s'po di me lexua. Hajde mre. Okay? Comes into the office. She gives me this letter. It was one of those things where they told her that she won a TV, which to her was the world.
Right.
But she had to go to Pennsylvania for a timeshare tour. I said, Mashka.
That's a scam.
It's a scam. But and I still remember she tried fighting me on it. And I said, you know how I know? I said, because my father made me go to Pennsylvania with him when he got the same thing, and all we got was a set of knives that broke 2 days later. Okay, it could be something as small as that.
Right,
you know,
right.
it could be an immigration question. That's the magic topic these days.
Yeah.
You know,
I will. That's why I would love to see this organization evolve or get created, because there's so much. It's not just it's immigration, it's accident, it's actual advice on different legal issues. It would be nice to have an organization that we can go to say that has lawyers from different areas that can come together and educate about what's happening in the community and how they can help.
Two thoughts.
Sometimes you just have a quick question. Say maybe it's a real estate. Maybe you have a tenant that's not
Real
paying, and you have a
estate,
quick question and say, "Hey,
Yeah.
is this something that I should?"
100%. But it could even be like I said to you before, the old lady coming there with a document.
Right.
She can. I'm sure she can ask somebody at the laundromat or something. But she's getting this from a lawyer.
Right.
Yeah.
Now she's confident
Yes.
in what she's being told.
Yep.
But two thoughts into to what you said. I think we need one. I think we need an
I think we
Albanian
need-
Bar
I-
Association.
yes.
I'm going to tell you, I
And
belong.
if you don't have time, then maybe you can be the advisor. and
I would
try to get
advise,
this-
I would tell anybody out there who's watching this, I will advise as much as possible. I can't take a leadership role because I just don't have the time.
Yeah.
But I'm a member of the Dominican Bar Association. Now, there's 2 Dominican Bar Associations. I'm sorry. The Dominican Bar Association is the Dominicans. I'm also a member of the Colombian Bar Association.
Wow.
Colombian is not Colombia, the Spanish place. It's Italians for Columbus.
Oh.
They have their own bar association.
Wow, look
I'm a
at
member
that.
of that. Okay, I'm a member of the Asian Bar Association. I'm a member of
so we need an
the
Albanian Bar
Jewish Lawyers Guild.
Wow.
You know, we Albanians sometimes, we talk about other races and we say, oh my God, like they plot together and they do this. They don't plot together. They stick together. Okay? That's all they do.
They're more organized.
They're more organized.
Yeah.
They stick together.
They've also been in this country longer than
No,
us.
no, no.
100%. I agreed, but I tell you right now, Albanians have advanced a lot.
A lot.
A lot.
Yeah.
And this is the second thought that I have as to what you said. And I say this proudly, actually. When I first became a lawyer, I can count on one hand the number of Albanians that were lawyers.
Yeah.
They were all men, okay? Right? And then you kept going, it was more men. Today, the females far outrank
Really?
the males
Wow.
by far. And I'll tell you right now, I have to deal with them sometimes. I've interviewed some of them, okay?
Impressive.
The women are impressive. I'm being careful because my father's still alive and he's that old school kind of Albanian that I told you.
What do you mean a woman?
Very impressive,
Yeah.
on point, organized. As a lawyer, that's the number one key. You got to be organized. If
Yeah.
you're not organized, your brain's not going to be organized.
Yeah, I think
And-
women tend to be more organized than men.
I'm very, very impressed with them. And I'd love to have an organization formed. Love to get one of our females as the head. But
Yes.
That's an amazing idea, Nick. Let's
So
put
if
it out
anyone's
there.
interested, please
Let's put
contact
it out
us.
there.
yeah,
We definitely need an Albanian Bar Association. Now that you mentioned that we don't have one, it's actually pretty pathetic that we don't. We have, I think, every other organization out there. We have too many organizations, but not actual meaningful ones that can really help the community.
well, you ever heard the old joke
No,
about the people in Shkodër?
no.
Trenjers katër partia.
Yeah, that's true.
That's how we Albanians are. But yes,
Very true.
because even during a break, we were discussing the law enforcement.
Yes, the NYPD.
I went to their dinner this past year in Yonkers. Their annual dinner was my first time going there.
Yes.
There were 500 people there.
Yeah.
There were higher ups from the NYPD. There were lieutenants.
Yeah.
There were commissioners.
They're more organized.
It's amazing how far that they've
Yeah.
gotten. And listen, I got to tell you, lawyers, I think we make a little more money than the NYPD does. We can do it too.
Yes, you do.
Yes.
I think you guys are a little bit cocky, and maybe the ego gets into the way. I would
I
think.
can't speak for myself. There is a lot of ego there. I personally, to this day, my father will smack me in the head and he will say, "Nicky, you think you big shot? You big." I can't finish that word. But as far as I'm concerned, with the Albanian Bar, I don't need a leadership position. I don't need any recognition. I don't need any of that. I just want to I want to leave something behind. I'm 52. I got plenty of time on this earth, God willing. But it's something that I really would like to leave behind.
Which goes into my question that I always ask every guest, like, what's your legacy that you want it to be?
I think my legacy is multifold. I've done a good job so far. I want to continue doing a good job with that committee that I have in the Bronx. I think that I've made a change for the better with the diversity of the committee. I'm not getting into DEI or anything like that, but just being able to have judges that are screened by their true peers.
Right.
That's one thing I like to think that my work has advanced the cause of workers' rights. I've won some cases that have changed the law in that regard. And if I could save even one person from getting injured or, God forbid, killed, I've done my job. But I really would like to leave that bar association. And I got to tell you, you inspired me, because
There you go.
walking in here, I wouldn't have said that.
Yeah.
But as you were probing me,
Yeah,
very,
you see?
very well. Yeah.
I could have been a trial lawyer.
You
too.
should have been. I came to realize that we should have one. And it's something that's lacking in our community.
There you
And,
go.
and it's a hole. It's a black hole there.
I think so. And I think it's a void too, because it's there's so much misinformation out there. It would be nice to have this organization to kind of put the right information out there and educate people to say, hey, don't believe that stuff.
100%.
It would go a long way.
But even on a business level, for example.
Yeah, business
and
too.
that's the base there, because the overall goal would be to empower our people. But even on a business level, being on a referral group with people. Oh,
Yeah.
I have an immigration case. I don't do immigration.
Right.
Give it to you.
100%.
Oh,
Exactly.
somebody got arrested, go to you.
Yeah.
Just like, that's on the simplistic
Well, that's
level.
what I'm saying. It's about networking, number one, but it's also about putting the right information and putting trust into the community as well. Because if we have this organization that can say, if I have something bad happen to me or whatever it is, I'm looking for information, I can go to this organization and say, hey, can you guys help me? Who's the best person to talk to about this situation? Whether it's, construction, whether it's criminal, whether it's business, real estate, whatever, entertainment, employment law. There's so many different, areas that we need help with.
100%, rather than going to the coffee shop, as I've been joking about all day.
And asking,
And
everybody for their opinions.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we need it. I definitely think we need it.
Many Albanians in diaspora are highly engaged in politics back home. How do you think you can, I know you just mentioned you're very busy, but how can you contribute to Albanian politics or Albanian laws that are existing today?
So, we have the voting coming up. I've been helping out
Diaspora
Mark Joe.
vote?
I've been helping out Mark
What's
Joe.
your opinion about that?
I don't have an opinion just yet, and there's a reason for that. I'd rather not express that. But you mean the diaspora being able to vote, or
Yes.
you mean which candidates?
No, both.
No, I can't get into the candidates.
Okay.
But as far as the diaspora, I couldn't be prouder to be able to vote in my country. Okay. Yes, I was born in America.
Yeah.
But to be able to vote in a country that, you got to understand something. Okay. And you know this actually. My family wasn't allowed to go back to Albania. We didn't know our cousins growing up.
Yeah.
Okay. The communists had the stamp on them.
Yeah.
God forbid they sent us a letter or something like that. Okay, the communists even changed their last names. They're not Gjelaj. They have a different last name. There's a river over there in Shal, Balbon. That's their last name, because the communists changed it. But by being able to vote, it kind of bridges that 50-year gap that we had. My grandfather went to his grave, Memal, because he couldn't go back to his homeland. He died in 1986, before communism fell. Okay, he wasn't allowed to go back. And by being able to do this, my father, when I told him that he was able to do this, he had tears in his eyes. He couldn't believe it. He has no idea who to vote for.
Right.
I'll tell you that much right now.
That's a whole other
That's a whole other question.
I'm going to give you a counter argument. But
Sure.
Yes. So the other counter argument to that is that the people that are living over there, they're saying, why should we choose who to vote for if we don't live over there? We don't know what the issues are back home.
That's a legitimate concern. That is.
How would you respond?
That's
to
a
that?
completely no. That's an argument. See, as a lawyer, sometimes you can't always debate. All right, when something's questionable, you can. When something's absolute, you can't. Okay, they have 100% right to that opinion, and it is a concern. But by giving us that power to vote, it's upon us now to make sure that we educate the voting people, not to tell them you're going to vote for this candidate or you're going to vote for this candidate, but to describe what the issues are. Okay, so a couple of months ago when, what's his name, the president of Kosovo?
Albin Kurti.
He came.
Not the president, Vjosa Osmani. Or
He also he's the prime minister.
Yeah.
Now, okay, yeah.
Vjosa Osmani is the president.
Correct. I met both of them, but I'm talking about him because he came to the
Albin
Bronx.
Kurti, yeah.
Didn't I meet you there that day? Yes.
We had,
So he came there.
yeah.
You think I didn't have anything better to do on a Saturday morning but to go to that? Besides the fact that Mark made you. Besides that, no, I was interested in hearing what he had to say.
Right.
I wanted to see how his mentality was,
Right.
what he thought. I thought there should have been more probing questions of him that day. I thought he spoke too generally. Okay, it's not a criticism per se of his
Right, right.
policy. I thought it was our fault for not giving him more pointed questions.
But at the same time, was the right step in the right direction. 'Cause
Agreed.
We had never had that much close, intimate meetings with a leader of our country, whether it is, him or Arama. When they come in, they usually come in. They don't really attend big masses or big meetings like that, or even small meetings. That was a small meeting,
Sure.
right? So to me, it was a good step, but I think we need more of those. But going back to the diaspora votes, if you think about it, it's going to have a huge impact for the country over there and their way of life. And now we're making decisions we live here, but we're making decisions for the people over there.
I agree with that. What I'm saying is that right shouldn't be taken away from us because of that reason. That right has now triggered a duty for the educated Albanians that understand the politics over there, that understand the issues, not the slanted ones. Okay, your partinat.
Yeah.
I'm talking about somebody that can speak to us three, for example, not tell us who he wants or he or she wants us to vote for, but tell us these are the issues.
Right.
This is his position. This is her position. This is their position. So I think it triggers a duty on us, but it's a 100% legitimate concern.
Yeah. Nick, thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you on the show. We learned so much about your background and who you are. Hopefully we inspired you a little bit.
We did. You did.
We would love to have you back with
Anytime.
Any future projects or any big things going on. And we'd love you to have you back on the show. But thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me both, and it's a pleasure meeting you both.
Thank you so much.
Very impressed. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.